my initial foray into personal development was through mysticism, through studying ancient mysticism, magic, ritual, cultural, esoteric studies, and things like that. And I found my way to Gurdjieff's work, and I think people may know who Aleister Crowley is. You know, he's the dark magician or whatever.
Yes. Oh, phenomenal. Oh, yeah.
But it's all self development, you know. And when I discovered Tony Robbins, I was like, wait a minute, these people are saying the exact same thing.
Come on.
They're selling it differently, but it's the same
Yeah.
thing. Carl
Come
Jung's
on.
work, Freud's work, and discovering Jung's work. God, man, 1998. I remember
Oh,
reading.
wow. Okay. Yeah.
I think, what is it, Man's Search for Meaning, or was
By
that
Viktor Frankl.
Yeah, Viktor Frankl. But then I don't remember the name of the Jung book that I read, but I was reading it back in 1998, and so it's been in my purview, in my interest sphere for quite a long time. So moving into personal development was one of those natural things that just kind of began to unfold. I started studying it more intensely. I studied astrology and learned some psychology. My mom became a psychotherapist when I was an adult, and I started learning from her. I learned hypnosis, and then I started practicing hypnosis with some of her clients, and she started giving me supervision, and it evolved. And then I went through a formal coach training and learned coaching models, and studied, kind of immersed myself in studying NLP. And
Yeah.
I'm one of those people that somebody will say, I have this teacher. And I'll say, interesting. Who's that teacher? Maybe I'll go learn from the teacher and ask them who their teacher is. And I just keep tracing it back and back and back and back and back as far as I can to learn. Like, I do want the synthesis, but I'm also interested in some of the older influences. And I've done that in a variety of fields, like psychology being one of them, but somatics, which is, talk about being a wizard, man. You want to really learn how to be a modern day wizard. Learn how to work with the body, with the spirit, with the animating force that moves through us. Man, it's fucking cool.
That has been my obsession over the last 3 or 4 years at this point. I started with NLP. And so I actually grew up super conservative Christian, which I believe you did as well. And,
did, yeah.
Would practice yoga in my room. I'd lock the door. And it was like super forbidden, but I was like, that rebellious. And so like lock the door, do yoga. I studied Buddhism in college and got like shunned by so many people for that. And it was all such a fun journey. But that's one of the things I realized. So many different avenues, different modalities, different trainings, all were teaching a very similar process, just using their own vocabulary, using their own vernacular.
That's right. Yeah, we can point at the sky. We have a word for what's out there, and I can use a word in the English language to articulate what the color is or what the shape is. There are hundreds of languages, and each of them is going to sound different. It's going to be articulated a little bit differently, but we're pointing at the same thing. And there's a quote of Anthony DeMello's that I love, and I don't think it's him. He's quoting somebody else. You know how that is. Quotes.
Oh, yeah.
Somebody quotes somebody who's quoting somebody who's quoting somebody. But he says, the Sufis have a saying, the mystic points at the moon and all the idiot sees is the finger. Words are the finger. The moon is what the words are pointing towards. And he was using it in the context of talking about God. God is a word to describe something that has no words to describe it, right? And we can apply this concept to pretty much everything. Words are just concepts. They're abstractions of reality. But reality is concrete. It's absolute. It's right there. Now, we may get into debates and arguments about how we're defining it, but then we're just arguing about the finger. We're not actually attending to what the finger's pointing towards.
Come on.
Yeah.
I normally don't share this on this show, but I want to. It's so applicable here, and I think you'll get a kick out of this because this ties right in. So probably this would have been 2019. I went out. So I grew up super Christian, a little background, super conservative, and we ended up hopping between a handful of different sects of Christianity. We went Catholic, Baptist, you name it. we tried it. We were Amish for a while. I learned that a couple years ago. And so I threw out all of religion, all spirituality, everything back in 2017. I was like, I'm done with this. Because I had one question, and I was like, why does God have to limit himself to one thing? Why does evil exist? Like I had a few questions and lost a lot of friends over it. So I was like, cool, I'm done with all of this. Fast forward to 2019, I get to this retreat that was supposed to be a business retreat. And I show up and I felt in Christianity, in like the crazy Christianity, you call it the Spirit, the Holy Spirit, this energy, right? And I look around, there's 20 people there. I didn't know any of them. It was the middle of Utah, and turns out I found out throughout the day, handful of things happened. Healings in my vernacular for it were healings had happened. My vernacular were prophecy had happened. My vernacular was the Holy Spirit, feeling this energy. And I found out throughout the course of that weekend, I was the only one there with a Christian background.
Oh, fascinating.
We all were sharing the exact same experience, but we had atheists, we had agnostic, we had witches, we had, you name Buddhist, like everyone there, Hindu, Mormon. It was a wild group. And there were literal healings happen, like someone whose shoulder had been hurt for about 10 years got healed that weekend. We had prophecies being able to tell into people's lives on shit that was going on. And me having my background, I was very confused. Being the Christian, like everything has to fit in the box. So I went in bed that night and I was like, God, we haven't talked in years, but I don't know what to make of this. And what I got was that we all were sharing the same experience, but we all just had different perspectives, different perceptions, different vernacular, different vocabulary to describe the same common experience. It's like you don't teach every child to learn the same thing in the exact same process. People learn differently. Why would we expect the same experience for everyone to interpret that the exact same way? It just wouldn't happen.
Yeah, you get deep enough into mysticism and you find yourself to a point where the mystic says there are no words. That which is beyond definition, that which is beyond words. I studied Kabbalah for a while, and there's a layer of the discussion which is that which is beyond words. There are no words for what we're describing, the ineffable, that which is without. Right? And in Buddhism, there are no words to describe these states of being or God, the divine, and whatever we want to call it, right? And in science, there are sometimes we're looking at things that we may have some language for, but at the same time, you get deep enough into particle physics, and it's like, what's happening?
Exactly.
How do we describe it? It just is. There it is. It's happening, right? And I appreciate the wide array of background of my own interest over the years, because it helps me to weave these things together and see the connections between everything that has become so separated and siloed in our world.
That on that note, I didn't expect to get into any of this, but I'm so glad we did. On that note, you grew up conservative Christian, and you started getting into mystics, getting into this world of, you could say, if you grew up Christian, you could say hypocrisy, or not hypocrisy, a blasphemy. You could say these worlds that are diametrically different from the Christian perspective. And that was where you grew up. And now you are very prominent in the personal development space, in the healing space. I found you actually through healing from trauma, through your talks on that and your work in that world. Which I'm really excited to dive into in a little bit. So my question is, how does the different groups, we'll say conservative Christian and then some of these mystic groups, how do they approach healing from trauma similarly? May use different words, but how are they similar?
I think we're still, the similarities are the individuals still need support to heal. Right, so the healing is the thing that is the focus. The techniques and the strategies might be somewhat different sometimes, but we're still pointing at the same thing. Here is this what I'm calling trauma, right? The living memory, a reflex, or a difficulty that a person is experiencing that continues on long after the event, right? Here we are with this person that's experiencing these things. Well, we may use prayer in the church. We may use meditation in Buddhist or Hindu culture. We may assist a person to connect with themselves through mindfulness. The somatic experiencing approach is similar to mindfulness. It's a mindful sensory tracking that's guided by a practitioner, right? That's a really generalized overview of the complex process that's used in that system. But the common denominator here is that the individual is experiencing some difficulty, some pain, and we're helping that individual to heal from that pain. You know, there are a more conservative Christian view on some of these things. It depends on how extreme we go with conservatism.
There we go. Yeah.
Sometimes that might be looked at as spirits having an effect, or a dark energy, or the devil having an impact on the individual, which are words to describe the same phenomena. In shamanism, we might say that the souls become fragmented, right? And we have to retrieve the fragments from the places where they're living or lingering on. Well, when we experience something that's so overwhelming that our body can't process it, there is a residue of sorts that can be left over in the body. And so in a way, soul fragmentation is the fragmenting of the psyche. Psyche really means soul anyway, right? And so the whole field of psychology is the study of the soul. It's just we don't call it that anymore. We think of it as the study of the mind, but it's consciousness, right? It's the living in essence of a human. So we have that fragmenting, the bringing together of those fragments, or the integrating of that energy in the body, is the reintegration of the soul. We're just using different words, right? Scientific language describes it one way, and spiritual language describes it another.
Do you, from a personal standpoint here, do you have, or what resources would you recommend to go deeper into that? I want to at some point write a book on the similarities and how the concepts are similar between psychology, religion, philosophy, science, and how we just use different languages to explain similar phenomenon or similar experiences or events. I obviously don't know enough to do that. What resources would you recommend to go deeper into that?
Well, I think what I did that's allowed me to synthesize myself is I spent a little time learning about one, then I spent some more time on another, then I learned about another. And I did them sometimes in isolation of the others, sometimes in conjunction with the others. And over time, I began to see the similarity. I began to notice the threads that, oh, we're using different language here, and it still seems like we're pointing at the same thing, right? In the field of somatics, one of the largest influencers in my work currently is a man named Stanley Kellerman, Keleman, Kellerman. And Stanley Kellerman created a field called formative psychology. Now, he didn't train a lot of people in this methodology, so there aren't a lot of practitioners that practice formative psychology. But I named my company Formative Somatics as a nod to Stanley Kellerman's influence on my work. Peter Levine's work has influenced it, but you could read Gurdjieff's work. And Gurdjieff it's much older. But again, it's Vajrayana Buddhism. So you really want to, you can go and explore Vajrayana Buddhism. And Vajrayana Buddhism is going to be saying something similar, except the words that they're going to use to describe what's going on in the body and the spirit and the psyche are going to be a little bit different. You can study Jung's work, and he talks about the projected self or the collective unconscious, right? And the projected self is the unconscious self, or is the soul. It could be considered that. You could study astrology, and you're going to again then see archetypes spread out to describe personality structure, which turned into psychology. There are so many different places that we can learn, and it depends on how deep we want to go. Like learning nervous system physiology from Dr. Stephen Porges. Steve's work is unbelievable. Now, you have to acclimate yourself to some of the scientific language, and you can. Deb has synthesized some of his work to make it a bit more palatable for the non-academic or the non-scientist. But his work is revolutionary in our understanding of social interactions. Well, that helps us to better understand attachment theory and bonding and how we as humans bond and need to be in relationship with each other. And it also shows some of where the nervous system bundles of electrical current are. Well, when I see that on a body, what I see is the chakra system. And then I think of Chinese medicine and acupuncture points and acupressure points and how there are meridians all over the body. Those meridians follow the nervous system. Right, so again, we have these independent groups of thinkers, these independent places where people are studying and putting language to what they're discovering. And then we have cultures that are separated by hundreds, if not thousands of years. So we don't have the context in which they were describing these things. So the chakra system, that's really ancient. Well, maybe those are just the words for their spinning energy that's in the body, right? Well, spinning energy, electrical current, nervous system, right? And I will often say to myself when I'm looking at these things, and I'll go, well, we're just using different words to say the same thing, but we're arguing about who's right. When in reality, we're all pointing at the same thing. We're arguing about the finger. Whose finger is what finger? What is the finger? And it's not the finger. It's what the finger points towards. It's the moon. And we miss it in the mix, in the midst of our cultural difficulties. Long-winded way of saying, to deepen in these things, I think that be curious, be an explorer, and follow the rabbit hole into these different areas. And if I'm talking directly to you, I'd say the things that are most interesting to you, see who inspired the author, who do they reference, and Klingman was really good about referencing his influencers.
Phenomenal.
And so I went and I bought books from the early 1900s that describe constitutional types or somatotyping, endomorphy, ectomorphy, mesomorphy. And so then I read the research studies. Be curious, follow that curiosity, and at some point, all of that, it converges inside of you. And the threads of connection seem to just emerge.
When it comes to these issues of, we'll say issues of language, or these difficulties of language and using different words, different language to say similar things, do you think with the internet, with access to information via the internet, we're able to bridge that gap faster and easier?
Well, I think the potential,
or has it become more tribal?
Is there?
Oh, the potential is there. Okay.
Yeah, I'd say the potential is there. But do we leverage the potential that's there? Sometimes no, because our cultures are not encouraging it. And this kind of gets to the crux of an issue. And if you, I think you said you've watched a couple of the podcast episodes that I've done, you probably will know where I'm going here. The crux of my issue that I see is that we've got problems that are systemic, that are problems that nobody's even really noticing are problems. They just call it culture. I'm sure there's a quote somewhere of somebody saying this, but you want to see patterns of trauma across history. Look at people's family cultural. It's just a family trait. That's just the way we are. No, that's just hereditary trauma. That's learned behavior, right? The culture continues to reinforce the thing that's happening. And I think we have further division between cultures right now simply because it's just the culture is not supporting something different.
On that note, you have many times in your content mentioned that your ultimate goal is to re-domesticate. I have it written down here, to re-domesticate our society. That's, if you boil all of the steps down to the crux, that's what it comes down to. When it comes down to that, to the re-domestication of our society, what are some of the important things that we have to re-domesticate, that we have to unlearn or relearn?
Yeah, I don't think we have enough data to really identify those yet. It's what I see or am aware of, depending on how we want to frame here, is religion has had an influence on culture. Culture's had an influence on religion. Religion has had an influence on government. Government has an influence on society. Cultures, especially here in the United States, have blended. So customs and traditions and religious leanings have come together. But it's like this in every culture on the planet. We have things that are influencing the way that people think, the way that they interact, the way that they socialize, and it becomes embedded. It becomes embedded in the stories that we tell, and it becomes embedded in the way that we raise our young, right? Like the domestication that you're pointing to, right? So what are the things that we need to do to unlearn where we are? I think we need to define where we are and figure out what are the variables. What are the and this is what we're devoted to at the Truth Foundation, which is really getting a grasp of this. This is probably a multi-generational research study. And it's going to take us a long time, I think. But maybe with machine learning and AI, we're able to do it faster. I don't know. We're in some pretty cool conversations about that. So we'll just have to see. But we need to be able to define the problem clearly before we can ever solve for it. And what I find really interesting, Gabriel, is that anywhere I go and have a conversation about this, I end up in a conversation invariably with scientists, with therapists, where they're looking for solutions. And I think that's great because we want to find a solution. But the difficulty I have with that is I don't think we've clearly defined the problem well enough. I don't think we have enough data on what's causing the problem in order to point towards a solution yet. And I think we have a lot of treatment systems that have built up out of treating symptoms, but we're not preventing that, right? A true cure for something means that you never need to go back for treatment again. Like, if we really digest that, right? I went and I had an ayahuasca ceremony and I'm healed and I'm cured. I'm going back next weekend. No, we're not cured. We're not healed. We're having insights. And I'm not putting down ayahuasca. I'm just picking on it right here as an example. Right? I've been working with this therapist for 30 years. Okay, why are you still working with that particular therapist? And I'm not putting anything down about that therapist, but what I'm saying is that we have a distorted view of what healing might look like and treatment, where we oftentimes return to the thing unaware that we wouldn't need the thing if we were resolving what was underneath. And so our mission is really to figure out, well, what is the thing underneath that needs resolving, and what are the things that are causing it? And we don't have enough data yet to say. I think, but this is my naivety right now, I think it's caused by structures of culture across the planet. But it could be something else. It could be something else completely different that I'm unaware of because of my limited understanding here as who I am, right? So we have to gather enough data to really, really understand what is causing this in the first place. I know how to treat some of the symptoms. I know how to help resolve some of the lingering the echoes of shock trauma or attachment trauma. I understand the treatment process for some of these things, but that doesn't prevent it. And the question's bigger, right? It's like, how do we change the way families raise their children? How do we change the way we as a culture treat each other? How do we change our reaction to people hurting? And like, and I don't think it's about everybody being happy. I think because pain is inevitable. It's not that we want to stop pain from occurring. It's that we want to build our resilience so that when difficulty occurs, we can bounce back from that difficulty and continue living our lives. And this is that common misconception, I think. People across time have dreamt up a utopian world where there's no conflict. Well, I mean, that's a great idea. I mean, it's lovely. And I think a better dream is a world where we can handle conflict, where conflict doesn't destroy each other. It doesn't involve two people destroying each other. It involves people feeling activated and then knowing how to be with that, riding it through and staying connected through the midst of it. And fuck, man, that's the hardest thing to do.
Yeah.
Like to say, I don't agree with you right now. I feel triggered and I'm here with you. I'm not going anywhere. I'm not making it personal about you. I recognize what's going on. And ultimately, it'd be great if we didn't have a whole bunch of those triggers in the first place.
There's that too.
But I go in circles again, which because we have adaptive responses. And how is it that we've learned to adapt to our surroundings by the way that our bodies encode sensory input? So maybe it's just who we are right now. But I think that's changeable because we're so malleable. Anyway, I'm kind of
what I was going to ask.
The circular thoughts because we don't really know yet.
We don't know exactly. So, hearing you talk here, and with the research I was doing beforehand, this is where my brain was going, was the viewing humans and viewing trauma responses as, okay, the human is broken versus the human is adaptive and the human is adapting. When it comes, so you have this firm belief, and I love you have a lot of different beliefs than a lot of people who promote themselves as a healing coach or a healing modality. And I appreciate that a lot. One of these is the broken versus adaptive. And can you explain that? Actually, I'm just going to, instead of me trying to summarize it, can you explain that?
Yeah. This is one of the first things that we in the trauma and somatics training that I lead. One of the places where we begin is this point right here, and it is such a huge part of my philosophy with the way that I interact with my clients and with the people who are close to me and just pretty much everybody in my life. Let me back up a second and kind of set this up. I think that we have, as a culture, have a tendency to perceive a human as created rather than as organic matter that grows. And when we do this...
Can we pause right there?
Yeah.
There are so many implications to what you just said.
Yeah.
We tend to view humans as created as opposed to an organic matter that grows.
That's right. And rather than organic substance that's in a growth cycle or that just is in response, growing like a plant.
Yeah. Okay, sorry to interrupt. The implications of that are phenomenal, and I've yet to hear anyone say that. And so that's triggering a lot in my brain. Wow.
And me too, right? So this is the crux of the difference of how I hold humanity and the people that are across from me. And this helps me to just dispel shame, completely neutralize it. Oh, wow, I did that thing. Well, socially, I just don't like that. But from an adaptive standpoint, shit, that was really brilliant. I just did a thing to try to protect myself and stay safe. That was a compulsive thing that occurred, right? Let's use the fawn mechanism as an example. Tend and befriend, or social mimicry, right? Well, I was afraid that something would happen socially and I would lose my standing socially, which threatens my survival. So what did I do? I unconsciously pacified the individual that I was with, and then I look back on the situation and I judge myself and beat myself up for it and call myself a pushover. Instead of saying any of those things now, with this frame, I can look at myself and I can evaluate myself, and I can say, oh, there was that time when something happened socially, and now I created an adaptive response. And so when that thing's triggered, here's the adaptive response. I'm just making up a story right now just to articulate this. Yeah. So that's just a simple example. But when I understand the developmental psychophysiology of a human organism, then I really understand that it's an unconscious behavioral response in an effort to stay alive. The organism is simply in an adaptive kind of situation. So where we begin, I'm going to kind of shift again. Where we begin within trauma and somatics is offering this perspective. You, Gabriel, are whole and complete exactly as you are. I can trust you. If we're in a relationship where we're working together, I trust you and your body and the organic intelligence that is present in you to know how to manage itself. And I offer support along the way. When things occur, I don't layer judgment on them. I bring curiosity. I ask questions, we deepen in understanding, and I hold that it's intelligent. Whatever it is, there's an intelligent explanation for the behavior, for the strategy, for whatever's going on. And so when we want to change our behavior, we can say, well, let's understand. What's the intelligence of this? I'm stripping away shame. Oh, there's a good reason for my behavior? Wow. And again, if I think of myself as created, I'm looking to something else other than my nature to be responsible. But if I think of myself like a tree that grows, I can look back over the history of me and I could recognize the influences in my growth. You put a tree in a small fishbowl, it's going to grow to the size of the fishbowl. You change its environment, it grows in response to its environment. You give it heavy wind, the tree grows in a certain way. You give it no wind, the root systems, and then give it a gust, and it's going to blow over, right? Everything that we come into contact with from preconception, the genetic history of a human, right? Our parents' history. Everything that's being experienced has some small impact in how we develop. And then the environment that we're coming into has an influence on how we develop. And then, especially early life, major influence on how we develop. So it's not to say that we can point our finger at childhood and say this is why we do what we do, because it's not true. But we can say this is the foundation that had an influence on how we adapted to our circumstances. And that removes layers of judgment, because now we can accept the individual's behavior and our own as, well, isn't that an interesting adaptive response? Let's see if we can work with it and help it to shift by learning something new. It's not being demonized anymore.
Is this why the idea that in order to truly change something, yourself or someone, you have to accept that thing? in order for that change to happen. Does that tie in here? Is that why?
Yeah, absolutely. Because if we are resisting what is, we're constricting around it. When you're in pain or difficulty, whether it be emotional or physical, half of that discomfort is from your resistance to the discomfort. And the resistance is intelligent because our body's like, I don't want to feel pain. So what do? I constrict. I resist it. But if I let go of my resistance, I'm half of my discomfort's gone. And I think Thomas Hanna talks about that in his book Somatics. And that's a great book. His focus was a lot on muscle, voluntary and involuntary muscle contraction, and sensory amnesia is what he called this, where our brain and our body are disconnected from each other, and we're not really getting the signals from the different parts of our body.
Fascinating.
Yeah.
Oh, I'm enjoying this so much. I'm adding that to my reading list 100% as soon as we get off of this. Thank you.
Anything by Stanley Kellerman too, man. I'm telling you, his work is just. I've bought every book that he's ever written, and I'm in the process of acquiring all of his lecture series and things like that. And he puts into language, and for me, I enjoy his academic language. It may be too academic for some, but he puts into language in such a beautiful way the journey of the human organism. During gestation, we're growing and we're forming. And we're forming in response to input, sensory input, and then we form in response to internal input, the internal image we hold of ourselves, and on and on and on. And he points to the way that the human organism wants to grow and to develop. Like that is its most natural state. If you watch a child and you don't influence, the child's curiosity will teach it everything it needs to know about its environment. Right. And we're no different. We've just been conditioned to resist or inhibit some of that curiosity in the world. But the human's mission, so to speak, is to learn and to develop until the point of death. And there's growth even in that, like the entropy.
Yeah.
Right.
So when it comes to the foundation of healing, a lot of people look at it and say, okay, the foundation is that you're broken and you need to be healed. The foundation is that foundationally different. You've also talked about catharsis and release versus healing. And I know over the last couple of years, that's become a lot more prominent and a lot more social media focused, we'll say, and influencer focused. So given that those two are fundamentally different and fundamentally, we'll say fundamentally different, what with your healing process and how you view healing from trauma and healing in general, what else are different? What else do they do that you say that's not accurate, that shouldn't be done that way, or that's not as helpful? This way has been really helpful for me.
Well, I think there's two things here. One is how we frame and how we sell something. So the way that we frame it to our customer or to the person that we're drawing in to do the work. And that I think is misleading and misguided, and oftentimes comes from ignorance or lack of understanding, right? Not intentional. But what I'll say is that oftentimes people are led to believe through beautiful marketing and through these emotionally provocative experiences that what they need is to have this big emotional experience that involves feeling really big feelings and, massive sensations, breathing, tears, expression, and that is the answer to our ailment. Well, I would say that we are a relatively repressed society, but we're nothing compared to the Japanese society, which is highly repressed, right? And in need of expression. But expression isn't the answer to healing. it is necessary that we learn how to express our emotions, how to feel our bodies, and how to be connected to the inner landscape of what's going on inside of us. Many of us are mostly wandering around dissociated and disconnected and filling ourselves full of substances that continue that disconnection and deepen the severing between our consciousness and our awareness and our bodies. But there's something missing when we pursue those big peak states and make the assumption that that's going to lead to some sort of psychological, physiological change. We can often feel relief when we do big things. If I go run a mile, at the end of that running of the mile, I'm going to feel a dopamine. I'm going to feel this like overwhelming sensation in my body. I may feel tired, but I'm going to feel this, a high, so to speak. The exact same thing's true when we do emotionally expressive activities or breath work, for instance, or we pound a pillow with a plastic bat or baton, or we scream really loud. Any number of these things are going to stimulate a feel good because we're increasing the intensity within ourselves. But that feel good doesn't equal a change in the way that the body responds to sensory input. It just means we're tapping into feeling and we're having big feel good moments. I mean, I could go take some mushrooms and think that I've transcended all conscious reality and recognize that I'm one with everything and that we're all just energy vibrating. And then when the substance is gone and it wears off, I'm still back in my body. I never leave the body, but you know what I mean? I'm still in my body. I'm still in this world. I'm still moving through the world. So if the change is not reflected in how I behave in my interactions with others, then I'm not really changing. I'm just feeling good. And so my frustration with some of this is the framing of like, here, come and get saved.
That
Come
same
to
framing,
come to the revival. It's the exact same thing, man. Come to the revival at the Pentecostal church. Come to the revival. Come get saved. We're going to lay hands on you. Shake a bit. Feel better. You're going to feel so much better. Yeah, I mean, I may. And there are spontaneous healings. I don't want to say there aren't. People come out of their change sometimes because they've been so repressed or for other reasons. But a gentler approach teaches the body to be different. I could take steroids and lift something heavy. But when I stop taking the steroids, I can't lift the heavy thing anymore.
And that's why people go back to that modality over and over
Exactly.
again.
Yeah. Now I could go to the gym every day, 5 days a week, 7 days a week, and do small, not sexy, incremental, boring, repetitive exercises that nobody wants to do. And eventually I can lift really, really heavy. And I'll keep that ability if I consistently do these little things. Somatics, especially the way that I approach working with people, takes into consideration the long arc of adaptation to something new that's needed. Much like a muscle needs a long period of time, or a group of muscles needs a long period of time, the right nurturing, the right sleep, the right nutrition, the right balance of work and rest, right? The nervous system needs the same thing on a much finer tuned level. And so behaviors often come from our automatic responses to sensory input, right? So in order to change behavior, we have to change the way we automatically respond to things. That only happens by very slow, methodical implementing of behavioral change, right? And it's not sexy work oftentimes. It's not the big experience. It's the thing that's the hardest thing in the world for people to do. Why? Yeah. The people that sell the big thing are like the gym bros that are selling get a six-pack in 4 weeks or 6 weeks or something with no effort while still eating cheeseburgers. Like I'm thinking about this one particular guy.
I was going to say, I'm pretty sure I know who you're talking about.
Yeah. His marketing is
Yeah.
great,
Oh, it's
and they have a
phenomenal. But yeah.
full program. People are like, yeah, I want to be able to eat pizza and look like you. Absolutely, I do. But what's real is it's not sexy. Even, I caught Alex Hermosi's webinar, as a lot of people did, and it was fun to watch him. And there's a piece of what he was saying that really rings true to me, which is it's not the sexy work that creates success. And success in whatever endeavor you're trying to apply it, right? Whatever field, we're not just talking money here. We're just talking about success in whatever you're taking on. It's the work that requires consistent, regular effort of the things that you don't really want to do that are boring. Like we generate success by doing that. When my brother was graduating from medical school, the dean spoke, and what he said was, "You're not the brightest. You're not the smartest. You're the hardest working. And you're the ones that were willing to continue to work the hardest." And that stayed with me. It's the same theme. Why do sometimes the people who are not that great at music become famous? Sometimes it's the right place at the right time. Sometimes it's consistent effort. They're just continuing to do it. Anyway, I digress on a long tangent here, but to make the point that when we approach healing, or when I approach it, and the way I teach it, is we're using softer. I mean, we just think of it as a softer approach, gently encouraging change to take place, nurturing that change, like watering a plant, and then patiently waiting as the plant begins to grow and continuing to nurture it.
So
I'm thinking of a story here, unless you had a thought first.
go right ahead. Go right ahead. I have a question that can absolutely wait till after this story.
Okay. So this is a story that I first heard from a marketer, Eben Pagan. And I'm sure that other people have told this story, and I'm sure he heard it somewhere else. But I'll tell the story nonetheless. The story goes like this. I don't even know if it's true, but the analogy is beautiful. They're in Japan. There are these bamboo farmers. And they go out and they plant these huge fields of bamboo. There's this one farmer in particular who goes out and he plants a field. And it's an enormous field. And he plants it, and he goes out every day and he waters it, and he tends to it. And 6 months go by, and his friends are like, "What is going on here? You planted this field. It should be growing. You should just till it under and start again." And he says, No, trust me. It's going to grow. He keeps watering every day. He waters the field. He tends to the field. He weeds the field. He's meticulous with this field. A year goes by. Some of his friends start to leave his life. They're just not interested anymore. And his family starts to question him. They think he's this crazy guy. He keeps watering the field, tending the field. He says, "No, trust me, the bamboo will grow. This is a special kind of bamboo." Year 2 comes around, still tending the field. Still no bamboo has come up. And his family's starting to question his sanity now. "What's wrong with you? Till the field under. We're going to become destitute." People start leaving his life. In the 3rd year, finally the bamboo sprouts. And the interesting thing about this bamboo is it grows 30 feet a day. So every day it grows 30 feet. Now everyone wants to know his secret. Everyone wants a piece of the pie. Everyone wants to be his friend. And it's not so much about the friendship and the belonging piece here. It's that it takes time for change to take place. And I've heard the story told as 8 years or 12 years. And I don't think the amount of time matters, because the analogy is still the same. What we're illustrating is that so often in the journey of personal development, in the journey of entrepreneurship, in the journey of almost anything, there's this long period of time where stuff's happening beneath the surface. Change is taking place. That field had to grow a complex root system so that it could grow so fast. And there's all this underground growth, and the world doesn't see it. And so when we begin our work, we're doing these things that seem to do nothing. And then suddenly there's this exponential growth that seems to occur. but it's not really exponential growth. It's been growing all along. It's just we can finally see it out there in the world.
When hearing that story and then hearing how you have explained and framed it, I don't exactly know how to ask this question, but I will try. Yeah. This happens at every podcast. My favorite part is when there's a piece of knowledge that's just out of what I can communicate, and we get there.
Yeah.
How do you view healing? Is it, in your opinion, a state, a process, something else? How do you view healing?
Yeah, I think it's a process. The healing is a verb, right? It's a process that we undergo. Some things leave a scar. I look down at my hand because when I was 8, I liked to whittle. I loved the story of Robin Hood, and I liked making bows and arrows, and I would make them out of twigs and pieces of trees. And I had this tiny little Swiss Army knife, and it was so sharp. And I loved that little thing. And I was whittling on a piece of wood, and I started going to cut down. I was in Boy Scouts. I knew not to do this, but I started cutting towards my hand. I'm like, I can do this. And I cut a little notch in the arrow so that I could shoot my bow and arrow. And I sliced right here into my finger. And there's still a scar that we can see on my finger. Cut right down into the tendon. Now, that doesn't hurt anymore. Healing was the process of the skin coming back together, of the tissues mending, right? But with some things, like emotional healing is the integrating of the difficult experience, right? The ability to manage and maintain an emotional state without it overwhelming us or triggering some physiological cascade of survival response, right? So learning to tolerate emotions might be a part of the healing process. But as the tissue comes back together, it reforms and it's strong again. And I could bend my finger. There's no pain. There's no residual, but there is a mark. And I've had, little stab wounds that have not left marks, right? And so sometimes the things that happen leave a residue, and they linger on, and we're reminded of them. I could think about that as like a trigger, maybe, where there's this little bit of a reminder when I'm in a social interaction that at one time something happened in a similar social interaction. But healing is, I can rub my finger over my scar and not feel the pain anymore, but I can recognize that it's still there, right? Over time, I'm able to touch that wound, and it doesn't hurt anymore. Now, I want to be clear. Sometimes there are some wounds that will never fully heal, that we will always feel them when we brush against them, right? And we learn instead to cultivate the capacity to be with that feeling that lingers on, right? So both are similar. I can still come into contact. I heard Peter Levine describe this once in a discourse between him and Thomas Hübl, where he said, trauma is like a gnarled, broken piece of wood where the pieces of wood stick out. And when we do trauma healing work, it's like taking a piece of sandpaper to that, and it softens it. And over time, it's not that the nub is ever completely gone, but it's that I can rub my hand against that. I can come into contact with that without it hurting anymore, without it causing pain. And I use the analogy of the scar because when we're thinking about healing, there is a process that happens. It's an active process of reintegrating and learning new ways to be in similar situations, right? The healing is the integrative process. But sometimes there's the memory that still lingers on. It's just how we are with that memory changes. Our capacity to tolerate some of that changes.
So as so many people numb their feelings and avoid that altogether. We have 1,001 different ways. Let's say someone's listening to this and they say, okay, I would like to start that journey, that first step. What would you recommend as that first step to help them sit with those feelings, to help them start on that journey?
I think it all depends on where we're beginning, but let's assume that where we're beginning is we're just kind of entertaining the idea of maybe possibly toying with the potential of feeling a little bit more of our emotions, or being with a few, like our thoughts, just a little bit longer. Where we begin is where we are. So I'd say set your expectations that you are exactly where you are. Don't compare yourself to me. Don't compare yourself to somebody else that's at a different place in their development. Compare yourself to you. You can tolerate this much, stay with as much as you can tolerate, and then shift your focus away. But practice coming into connection with yourself just a little bit more every day. And let's not even say more, just a little bit every day, until that little bit gets easy. And when that little bit gets easy, we expand a little bit more. And so just like with exercise, we're going to do only what we can do and just push ourselves a little. We're going to do the same thing. And eventually we can push ourselves a lot harder because we cultivate the resilience to do so. Our muscles get used to pushing hard, and we can really push hard, right? But in the beginning, we don't start there. If I have never exercised, I don't go to the gym 5 days a week. I start by going once and learning the movements, learning how to do them well, and gradually increase over time. And it's the same way with our emotions. It's the same way with feeling our body, right? It's the same way with analyzing our thoughts. A little bit by little bit by little bit, where we add more in. And I'd say work with somebody. Find friends, find practitioners, watch videos on meditation, read books about healing or about different techniques. Some of the people who I've mentioned here today are good people to check out. Peter Levine's work is really great work. His book, In an Unspoken Voice, is a great book for people who want to learn about his model, but Healing Trauma is a great book that offers technique that you can do with yourself. And you don't have to consider yourself traumatized to try some of these techniques. The process of feeling our bodies, it's a very human process. Klingman would say, what we want to do is to be, to recognize our true bodied nature, right? To be alive is to be bodied, right? I am this bodied human, right? And I want to recognize my body, my shape. I want to be connected to my shape. I want to recognize how I move and interact in the world, right? And so little by little.
Little by little.
And remembering that quote from Einstein, if you measure a fish by its ability to fly, it will always fail, or something like that. That's a horrible butchering of the quote, but if we measure ourselves against each other, then we're kind of robbing ourselves of the opportunity to be where we are. And we can't grow unless we start where we are.
Beautiful. Last question here. Who or what? So who are you currently learning from, or what are you currently learning? Not fully expanded and in it, but like just at the tip of your knowledge.
Oh, man, that's a great question. What are some of the things I'm immersed in right now? If you'd asked me this question last year, I would have rattled off probably 10 or 15 different authors. But the honest truth right now is that right now I'm in the process of creating a training. I'm immersed in the creative process with my mother. We are creating a model for practitioners that will take its place in the therapeutic industry. It's called formative somatics, and so we are deconstructing and reconstructing the things that we've been doing for, well, collectively the past 40 some years, but, her much longer than me, and me for the past decade. We've distilled them down into a training system. And so most of my attention is going to applying now the learning in a distilled way that's, educating others and how to use these things, how to do these things. Let me see if is there a book that I've been reading recently.
That's phenomenal.
I think most of the ones that I think most of the things that I named earlier are books that y'all can, any of you listening could check out. But the creative process for me is one of those processes where I can't be too immersed in somebody else's viewpoint.
Totally.
It's coming out of me.
A lot of respect for realizing that, and realizing how other people's view and input can impact your own creative process and your own how you show up and how you create. Props.
Thanks. I mentioned Thomas Hanna's book the other day, Somatics, and he and Moshe Feldenkrais are two people who I find really, really fascinating, and their life work really fascinating. And on the horizon for me, the Feldenkrais training and some of Thomas Hanna's work, those are on the horizon for me. The body work component, because I have a lot of the psychotherapy and a lot of the physiology background, and studying peripherally, but I haven't immersed myself in the body work training systems. I've read from their teachers, so that'll be the thing that's on the horizon for me from a training standpoint.
Fascinating. Oh, that will be, given your diverse background, that will be a really interesting component.
I think so, yeah.
Yeah. Fantastic. Well, if people want to find you, want to get in contact with you, join some of your trainings, how can they do that? The floor is yours, my friend.
Anybody can reach out to me on Instagram, at Will Rezin, Rezin, and I answer my own messages. I don't have a bot or an assistant in there doing that for me, so it may take me a while to get back to you. But I do my own stuff, and I work privately with a small number of people, but that's growing smaller and smaller as I teach more. The formative somatics training that I mentioned earlier is something that we're launching next year. Our hope is that it'll be ready in February, and that's going to be a 5-month-long PhD level immersive training from origins to spiritual emergence, and we're going through the whole gamut of human development and teaching how to apply our approaches somatically.
That's phenomenal.
I'm excited about it, man. It's I'd say a culmination of my mother's life's work, and I would say mine, but I'm young enough that it's not yet, but will be the playground for that.
Yeah. Wow. Oh, that's amazing. I am so excited for you for this to come out. Oh, absolutely. Thank you so much. This has been a blast. This has been really fun.
Thanks for having me.
I appreciate it. Oh, of course, man.